Welcome to the Inquiry 2.0. Today we delve into the life of infamous Glaswegian enforcer Mark Clinton, who was once labelled Scotland's most dangerous man by the media. Whilst Clinton undeniably lived a life intertwined with violence and had deep ties to Glasgow's underworld, he was more than just his notorious reputation. He was a complex individual with loved ones who cared deeply for him. Like many who tread the criminal path, his story is tinged with tragedy. In this article, we aim to unravel his life, the crimes he committed, and the treacherous world he manoeuvred through for almost half a century. A close friend of Mark, who spent time with him in Borel and had known him since childhood, paints a picture of a passionate Celtic supporter who was affable and never imposed or threatened those close to him. Like many from gritty working class cities across the UK, Mark grappled with alcohol and substance issues. However, he was not the monster many made him out to be. An intriguing detail shared by his friend is that Mark lived with diabetes and received treatment for it during his time in prison. Raised by a father he deeply admired, it's believed that his formidable reputation in the local area of Calton took root from several confrontations on its streets, as discussed in the documentary featuring Paul Ferris and Donald McIntyre. In January 2006, a report into poverty in the Scotsman newspaper stated that a child born in Calton is 3 times as likely to suffer heart disease, 4 times as likely to be hospitalised, and 10 times as likely to grow up in a workless household than a child in the city's prosperous western suburbs. A BBC Scotland news report also pointed out that partially due to poor diet, crime, alcohol and drug abuse, life expectancy in Calton is amazingly lower than in some areas of Iraq or even the Gaza Strip, and gave the average lifespan of a person living in the Calton area as 53.9 years, against a city average of 69 and a Scottish average of 78. Unfortunately for Mark, he would not reach any of those predicted milestones. The incidents Mark candidly talked to Donald McIntyre involved him cutting up lads who had crossed him or had given his father a hard time. He was merciless in those alleged savage attacks, one in which he opened up a belly of a man and the other brutally pummeled his enemy's backside with his weapon of choice, the blade. These type of attacks do not go unnoticed in the criminal underworld, and like Paul Ferris before him, he began growing a reputation as a man who would not think twice about using the most extreme violence if crossed. Often the violence was up close and personal, which is both risky and takes a massive amount of nerve. There are many deadly human beings in this world, mostly those who sit in ultimate power and decide whether to give an order that will wipe out thousands of human beings in some phony war. But you can bet a pound to a penny these politicians have probably never had a fight, let alone been involved in deadly violence close up. It's a different level, and those that know will understand the brutality of physical combat in close quarters. If you do not possess the right physical and mental attributes, you can quickly go from predator to prey in a deadly second. Criminals know this only too well, and that is why the likes of Mark Clinton are a rare commodity and always in demand by crime gangs, whether it be enforcing punishment, beatings, debt collecting, or even taking lives. Mark served many prison sentences throughout his life, a mixture of petty crimes from driving offences to more serious weapon charges, and stints on remand for the most heinous crimes, including murder. In the context of this documentary, it is important to understand the differences between the Scottish court system and England's for Mark's journey. The remand process in Scotland differs from England, with a 140-day ruling, meaning that if your case has not come before the courts within that period, you can apply to be released on bail. This comes into play in the case of Mark Clinton, whilst awaiting a murder trial that we will look at in due course. Paul Ferris, a Black Hill native, diminutive in size but a giant in courage and ferocity, is one of the best known figures in Glasgow for infamy and transformation to best-selling author and businessman. Growing up, Ferris had also been very active with a blade and had gone to war with the Welsh clan, a notorious family who were rightly feared in Black Hill and beyond. His merciless attacks on the brothers earned him a reputation and spot on the most powerful crime lords team in Glasgow, one Arthur Thompson Sr. A bitter fallout believed to have been caused by Thompson's son Arthur Jr. led to a chain of events that would see Arthur Thompson Jr. and 2 respected friends of Ferris, Bobby Glover and Joe Hanlon, losing their lives in horrific murders. Paul Ferris had been cleared for the murder of Thompson Jr., but received 10 years for weapon charges, later dropped to 7 on appeal. Interestingly enough, when Ferris was sentenced by Judge Henry Blaxall, QC, he originally got 15 years, but on being led away, Ferris was recalled and was given a corrected sentence of 10, due to that being the maximum allowed by the humiliated judge. It was after his tour of the dispersal system in England and back to Scotland when Paul Ferris met the new up-and-coming enforcer, Mark Clinton, in Barlinnie. Rumour has it they met down the block, and whilst Ferris was on a phone visit, he had left Mark's canteen by his door to help him out, as all proper villains would do for a fellow con that was in need. This meeting of two men from different areas of Glasgow's underbelly would allegedly be the spark that caused carnage on the streets of Glasgow, as retribution was dealt out to one of the duplicitous characters Scotland has ever seen in Tam the Licensee McGraw. Tam the Licensee McGraw was a gangster involved in organised crime, including extortion and drug trafficking. Once one of the wealthiest men in Glasgow, he owned numerous businesses, including security companies and taxi firms, as well as properties throughout Scotland and Ireland, with an estimated worth of 10 million. His drug trafficking activities were worth an estimated 14 million. He was also known to have deep connections with corrupt police officers and used his influence in this regard to move relevantly unscathed at allegedly the cost of his liberty, making him a hated character within large sections of Glasgow's underbelly. The Glasgow of 2002 was rife with tensions. McGraw was on edge. He was paranoid, thinking that the newly released Paul Ferris was going to try and take his empire. This led to a chain of events that would bring his empire crashing to the ground, and Mark Clinton wrapped up in a murder trial. Firstly, a contract was taken out on Paul Ferris by Tam McGraw for 100,000. The only problem being the guys to take the job on were good friends of Paul's. They took a 10 grand deposit, told Paul all about it, and spent the money on a party for Ferris and all McGraw's enemies, humiliating Tam McGraw in the process. Secondly, T.C. Campbell, wrongly convicted of the Doyle Ice Cream War murders, was attacked on release by McGraw and Billy McPhee, one of McGraw's deadliest enforcers. They beat him with golf clubs and blades, but Campbell, a seasoned scheme street fighter, fought tooth and nail to survive in front of dozens of witnesses on the estate. The brazen attempt to kill Campbell failed, and he survived after extensive treatment in hospital for a fractured skull and other severe injuries. This attack on a man who had already lost much of his life in jail for a crime he did not commit infuriated the public and the criminal underworld, especially as it was believed it was actually McGraw who was behind the fire attack on the Doyle's house, and this was an attempt to silence Campbell from pointing the finger. Shortly after McGraw's attack on Campbell, he himself was caught slipping on a rare outing from his heavily fortified house, where he was attacked, being stabbed several times with only his body armour saving his life. The papers ran with a story that Ferris was the perpetrator in a full story concocted by McGraw's team, but I'm told that Mark Clinton was the man who attacked McGraw. Whether this is accurate is up for debate, as it was passed on to me by friends of Clinton who were not there firsthand to see the incident, and it would be fair to say there were plenty of people willing to attack him. Over the next year or so, many of Tam McGraw's paid enforcers were killed or injured, including his main man, Billy McPhee, decimating his protective circle. One of those was Billy McPhee, and the man prosecutors believe was the killer was one Mark Clinton. In the Springcroft pub in Ballyston, March 8, 2003, families had gathered settling in for an evening meal, watching the Scotland rugby team in action. In this seemingly harmless setting, a man entered donning a grey hoodie and jeans. Without hesitation, he approached a stockily built man engrossed in the game and brandished a 6-inch blade. Those present witnessed the horror unfold as Billy McPhee was mercilessly attacked up close and personal and subsequently succumbed to horrific injuries, too brutal to describe on YouTube. The Springcroft wasn't the typical backdrop for such a brutal crime. Not only was it unexpected, but the audacity of executing a hit in a place filled with children was shocking. But the world of crime is precarious. Merely 4 months before this event, McPhee survived an assault involving a fly gun. His subsequent murder spawned various theories, largely rooted in his association with McGraw and their dealings in the underworld. The brutality wasn't isolated. Within the preceding year, 2 other associates of McGraw met untimely deaths. Trevor Lawson, knocked over, Gordon Ross in a stabbing incident. However, McPhee's murder stood out for its audacity. He thought he was safe, believing that no one would dare attack him in a place filled with families, especially children. That false sense of security would prove fatal. The spotlight then turned to Mark Clinton, who was charged with McPhee's murder. The police already suspected Clinton of the previous attack on McGraw being a friend of Paul Ferris, and undoubtedly they would have suspected he was behind the systematic attacks on McGraw's men. The thinking from the police was that there was maybe only a few men in the city capable of this type of violence in those specific circumstances. To walk coolly and calmly up to a killer surrounded by his criminal associates, and sticking multiple times in vital organ areas, around and underneath the protective vest, takes a massive degree of nerve and the experience and skill sets to achieve the job successfully. Mark was one of the men they believed capable, and the other suspects were not in a position to take the job on. Mark was released prior to the case on bail due to the 140-day ruling, and he was approached by Tam McGraw and his heavies, who threatened and attacked him in an attempt to force him into setting his friend Paul Ferris up to be murdered, or McGraw would produce new witnesses to make sure he got 25 years for the McPhee slaying. Mark, being the man he was, told him in no uncertain terms that he wasn't interested in that kind of deal. Despite the weight of the accusation, the case crumbled due to insufficient evidence. Relying on the testimony of two witnesses, the case suffered a fatal blow when one expressed doubt about his previous identification of Clinton as the perpetrator. The attacker allegedly had a hook nose and was slim rather than stocky like Mark, and he could potentially have been brought in from outside the area. The case remains one of Glasgow's most notorious unsolved crimes. Detective Chief Inspector Brian Geddes emphasised the commitment to finding McPhee's murderer, stating that no case is ever truly closed, irrespective of the time that had lapsed. I have spoken to several people within the underworld in Scotland, and there are various theories. Some say the attacker was brought in from Liverpool or even the Middle East. Others are sure it was Mark. But apart from those factually in the know, who keep their cards very close to their chest and don't speak out of school, no one can be certain. After the killing of McPhee, the press suggested that McGraw paid Ferris a substantial amount of money to guarantee his safety. Like most newspaper rumours or allegations, there are no facts behind their assertions, and McGraw shared his time between Tenerife and Glasgow, largely out of the picture until his death from a heart attack several years later, 30th of July 2007. Mark, understandably delighted that the case collapsing, realised that was short-lived, as he soon came to the realisation that neither the police or certain courts of the underworld were prepared to let things go. The police allegedly tried to fit him up on a drugs charge, and after deciding to leave the city and the pressure he was under, went out for a night out, ending in Legs & Co. strip joint in the city. Some sort of altercation occurred in the street, and he was left fighting for his life in a coma for 3 days. I've not been able to verify if the beating was a random fight or with enemies of Mark's, but the hardest of men can come unstuck, especially when in drink or under the influence of drugs. Mark, being built of tough stuff, came through the ordeal and was back on the streets of Glasgow, no doubt with vengeance on the mind. Sometime later, Mark became embroiled in a dispute with a crime family over a security contract and was jailed for threatening developers on one of their sites. It was clear Mark had many enemies and had sunken into bouts of severe alcoholism and drug taking for large parts of his later life. He also suffered from a healthy bout of paranoia, so much so that when the esteemed Glasgow street photographer Brian Anderson was invited to Mark's flat at one point for a news article, he was shown all sorts of fatal booby traps Mark had concocted for anyone trying to break into his home and attack him, which shows the level of stress he was under. Criminality and violence is glamorised in the films and box sets, but the brutal truth is, far from glamorous and entrenched in deception, treachery and violence, with very few happy endings. As many of my videos show, it rarely ends positively. Mark sadly passed at the age of 48 in January 2019, in circumstances the police deemed not suspicious. I'm sure many will make a point of Mark's violent history as to why he should not be mourned, but his friends and family would differ, as everyone has dealt different cards in life, and for all his faults, he was described as a good man with family and friends, and his criminal acts were kept within the confines of the underworld. Okay, I hope everyone enjoyed that. Let me know in the comments what you know about Mark's life, and if you were friends or enemies, give me an idea of your thoughts on the documentary. The next one will be up in a few days, hopefully. I'm working on a couple of good subjects, but any other subjects you'd like me to cover, please put it in the comments and I shall add them to the list. And also hit the likes and subscribe and notifications if you don't mind. Thank you.